Norway wins. Fancy to see you all here. I mean, it's almost like I was just talking to you or something. Ooh, don't get aggressive, Chris. Don't get aggressive. I was getting aggressive. Don't get aggressive. What's going on, everybody? Alright, so this stream is going to be about the MacBook Pro a1708, which is the newer Retina 13-inch Pro. Lewis worked on one of these yesterday on stream, or day before, whenever it was, that had no backlight. This one came in and it turns on. It works perfectly fine, other than the fact that they could only charge it and use one position on the USB-C connector. On newer ones, they only have 2 USB-C ports, which is fucking dumb. But when they got liquid spilled on this, the laptop's pretty sealed up well, but the USB-C port had liquid all inside of it, and they had the charger connected, while it was just dripping water down on it from I believe a water pipe or something that busted in the building. But he brought it in. It would only charge in one position. The USB-C is reversible. You can put it both directions. And there's 2 ports here. And let me switch over to it. Of the 2 ports, only this one was working on this side. The other one wasn't working at all on either side. Surprisingly, this one had quite a bit of corrosion on it, but after just cleaning it up, this port works now, even though this data pin, or it's actually a power pin right here, which is connected to both, so as long as one's there, it should work. But this pin here is kind of eaten up, but it still does work. The other side is in pristine condition. It was just highly corroded. What's up, Freddy? I got the chips today, by the way. I got to work on this tomorrow. This side was working. As you can see, it's in really good shape. But this side here had no charging at all. Wouldn't do anything. So the first thing I did was looked and see if there's a schematic, which there isn't. So I knew that the USB-C would be universal across both sides because they have the same protocol on each port. So first thing I did was I went to diode mode, and I figured the longest ones are going to be ground because of safety. You always want your ground pins connected first. So when I check those in diode mode, I get a 0 volt drop to ground, which means that is indeed ground. And then I figured the next second longest ones were most likely going to be my power pins. So if I check those with diode mode, they come up with 0.158. And then I figure the rest of them are going to be data pins. Well, I noticed that if we go across here and we pin out all these, that one's 0.3, 0.03. If we go here, 0.3, 0.03. So you get consistency all the way across. So if we come down here, it's OL, 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 and 0.59. If we come down here, we get OL, 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 and then 0.59. Now before, there was nothing there. It would give me OL, and I flipped it over and metered the same thing on the other side, and it's exactly the same on the other side. So if we do our readings here, you get OL, 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 and then 0.6, 0.59. And then here you get the same thing, OL, 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 and then 0.6, 0.59. And then the consistency is there for all these pins, 0.3, OL, 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 0.3. So we have consistency across every one of these pins. So that gave me an idea, okay, we've got an issue with the pin itself. The pin is not making contact, or it's got a burnt trace, or something's going on. So the next thing I did is I went on the back side, and you can see where it's soldered through. It's got all these through-hole vias that it solders to. So I started going through and just kind of probing all these till I found on this port, till I found the pin that was on the opposite side. So I was hoping that maybe these ports talk to each other. That was my first thinking. So I flipped it, I soldered a wire, I flipped it back over, and then I started probing with my one probe on the wire, and then one probe on all these these vias. And I found that the via for that data line came out to here. So I was thinking, well, maybe if that data line is the same for both sides, it should be the same over here. Well, that wasn't the case. So the data line here goes to a completely different pin than it does on this side. So depending on how it's plugged in, that data line only comes in one direction. So I had to kind of use my brain and figure out, well, how can I tell which data line is going to be which? So if you separate the board out, there's about half the pins for one side and half the pins for the other. Majority of them are ground if you look at the actual tracing, but I went through and I probed out that this line here was the data pin for the opposite side, and I was getting a reading of 0.59, and then I metered here, I was getting 1.158, which is the same measurement I was getting on my power pins, which are these slightly longer ones. So I knew that this had to be a power input, and then I metered back to this one, and that one metered 0.59 also. I was like, well, that kind of makes sense. That would be a data line that matches the the diode reading that I was getting on the other one that's known good. The other data pins are all 0.3, so I knew I couldn't be mixing those two up because 0.3 and 0.5 are completely different measurements. So what I did is I started to probe around, and I looked at this side, and it's got like a soldered on cover, and it's like a multi-stacked USB port. So if you look at it, it's got like top ground layer, PCB, a plastic spacer, and then another what looks to be ground or of some sort. So I knew I couldn't really separate it and check inside of it. I was afraid that we would end up destroying the port altogether, and you cannot buy this yet. I would assume one day you will be able to, and you can just desolder this and solder a new one on, which would be great, but currently the parts market is not there. So I knew I couldn't take this apart. I didn't want to like fuck it up because I had 3 of 4 charging positions working, but the customer said they wanted all charging positions to work. So I went in and started digging into the actual Type-C connector. Well, Mobile Centric says iPhone. Yeah, I saw that at $495. So I started digging in here, and I dug and dug and dug, and I found where the via is that goes down into this board. So underneath this, one layer down is ground, but here at the very front there's a via that goes down into the connector and then runs back. So it runs straight down right here and then back into the connector and then comes out over here. Well, the via was completely corroded, like gone. Like I dug down as far as I felt safe on it, and there was nothing in it. It looked like a orangish color, like rust, and there was no via, there was no copper, nothing I could attach to. So I went ahead and dug out down to the ground layer, and I dug out the ground layer that's underneath this, and I laid in a little bit of conformal coating. I took some of my very fine wire and folded it up and soldered it, and then dropped it down in there and filled it with underfill around it, or not underfill, but the conformal coating. And then I ran my wire back against this raised ledge where the actual USB-C rests against, and I ran it as close as I could to the edge to keep it from having any issues with touching the port itself. And this wire is conformally, or it has its own coating on it, so it can't really ground out anyway. So after making my pad here and laying down all my conformal coating and hardening it up to where if something hits it, it's not just going to rip the wire immediately, I tested. So from that via to my pad, I should get continuity now, which I do. I now have continuity. If I go over here, let's see if I can remember where this one was. It was up here somewhere. It's right there. So that one goes to this point, and this one here goes to this one. And this one here is our power pin, where our power comes in. And if you see, these are connected. These power pins are the same. So after doing that, we can take our USB Type-C and the MacBook Air. Yeah, I've already got it done, Anthony. I did it yesterday. Alright, so we'll go ahead and meter this. You all won't be able to see it, but I'll read off what it's doing. Placing that in the ground, and I'm going to slide this out to the edge so I'm not stressing the USB port whenever I plug it in. And we're going to probe that point of power. See if I can get this cable in somewhere that's not going to fuck up. Alright, so we currently have 0 volts. So when we plug this in, let's see if I have a good ground here. This would help if we plugged it all the way in. It's not pushing all the way down now. Or am I not getting a good ground? Oh, I guess it would help if it's plugged in down there. I unplugged it whenever I was doing the soldering iron, or the UV light. Alright, so now that we actually have power fucking going to it, that would help. Take 2. So we're going to probe the power port here, plug it in. We get 5 volts, and then after the chip gives it the OK, it jumps to 20. Unplug it, flip it over, opposite direction, 5 volts, and then the CPU or the chip gives it OK, and it jumps to 20. So now, whenever we plug this in, 5 volts jumps to 20 volts, 20.16. Flip it over, plug it in, 5 volts. And then it jumps to 20.1516, and then it's falling. So we now have a functioning charging port. Where am I located? Bowling Green, Kentucky. So now we should have a functioning MacBook, and I'll pop this back in the housing real quick and we'll test it. Well, real quick being a relative term here, but as fast as I can so I can go home and eat some sushi. I just wanted to post this up since we got it working. I was pretty excited about it. I didn't have a whole lot of confidence in it, to be honest, because I was kind of worried that it wouldn't have enough gumption to hold up to being plugged into. What's up, Paul Daniels? Fancy seeing you about. Okay, so next one, plug that in. I don't know what all is required here, but I like to do as many as I can to make sure that I have everything plugged in that's necessary. Never really stopped to look and see what is and isn't required on these to be plugged in to test. The SSD on these looks like a fucking RAM chip. It's pretty interesting. Unless that is the RAM chip and the SSD memory is actually under the shields, which I think hold the RAM, which would be even more interesting. The new MacBook is quite interesting. It's got like a little daughter board that does like the LCD stuff, which I assume most likely has the backlight circuit on it. Maybe not. Actually, no. I think Lewis was showing that it doesn't. Anyway, it's got this little secondary board that has a bunch of shit going through it, and it's pretty interesting. Let me go ahead and screw down the battery here. The battery now has a giant screw or bolt or whatever you want to call it that goes into it and screws it down into the battery. It has these two little copper points on it that do all the voltage transmission. It's pretty interesting that they chose to go with that type of design. I mean, I guess there's nothing really wrong with it, but it's just kind of odd. Go ahead and cover that back up. They do like their stickers in this model too. Not that that's crazy different from any other model they've done. Look at that drop. I'm sure I'll find it in there. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn this thing on. Hopefully the battery's got enough juice in it. Should. Did I plug in the keyboard? Yeah, I'll plug it in the keyboard. Maybe I didn't. Let's see. Maybe I completely screwed it. Will it boot? Yeah, it booted. At least the fan's spinning. Okay, so I have no image. Why do you not have image? Did I not plug in the cable correctly? Let's unscrew our battery real quick. I don't think I unplugged the cable from the other side, so it should be plugged in. Try this again, and let's see. Why am I getting no image? Oh, there it goes. Now it's on. Alright, so we're at 66%. Let me make fucking my screen bigger here. Can't even see what I'm doing. Alright, so screen's on. We're at 66% and charging. I'm going to unplug it and I'm going to flip it and try that same port. Charging 66%. I'm going to plug it into this one. Charging 66%. And flip it over and try one more time. Charging 66%. So we now have function on all 4 ports. With our kind of rinky-dink repair, but Apple doesn't supply us any options, so this is kind of what we have to do. If the customer had gone to Apple, this most likely was going to cost them over $600 for the board alone. If they bought a used board, used boards are running right around $400 to $500, and hopefully this this fix will be sufficient for what they need. I'm pretty happy about it, but that's pretty much going to end it. Just wanted to kind of show that off. I was kind of proud of it. I didn't really get to do it on stream, so I wasn't even sure it would work, but it does, and pretty stoked about it. But anyway, that's going to end the short stream. I'm going to head home, go eat some sushi. Yeah, visible damage was definitely a big thing here. If we didn't have it, it would have been a pain in the dick. But I'm going to put this one back together tomorrow. I need to put the gaskets back on the USB ports, and then put all the screws back in. We should be good to go. But thanks for watching, guys and gals. You all have a wonderful night, and I will see you all later.